Hello everyone, good evening and a very warm welcome to the first episode of the inaugural Better Future Forum, Better Democracy. My name is Peter. I am the partnerships lead for Forward Democracy, which we'll be hearing about in just a second. So this marks the beginning of what we're hoping will become a long-running series of monthly events showcasing game-changing innovators working towards a future that thrives in tune with each other and the planet. So a quick bit of housekeeping before we kick off. We'll be screen sharing for the duration of the event and spotlighting speakers, so we'd recommend keeping your video layout in speaker view. Also, we are recording, so if you would prefer to attend anonymously, then please go ahead and hide your video or mention it privately to Josh in the chat box or that way, and we'll do the hiding for you. Which brings me on to questions. Please do ask questions and make points in the chat box throughout, which we will pull out and discuss. Yeah, please be mindful to stay muted. So it's with great pleasure that I'm going to hand you over to my colleague now, the original founder of Forward Democracy, Tom de Grunwald. Over to you, Tom.
Hi everyone, and thanks Peter. So as you may know, Forward Democracy was originally created as a vehicle for Swap My Vote, the platform which has paired thousands of voters in different constituencies across the country to help each other make their votes matter under first past the post. We've been in three general elections now. A vote swap is one meaningful step that people can take during an election towards a fair electoral system. We want ideally to make Swap My Vote obsolete and unnecessary, because the system should see everyone's vote count and be equally meaningful. And we've been trying to work out how we can promote better democracy in between elections. And in these days, when the conventions that underpin democracy and that it needs to survive are increasingly under attack, we need to defend democracy too. No doubt many of us this week have been watching the election across the pond, and these concerns will be very live for us. But the situation there isn't so very different structurally from the situation here in the UK. So even though the next general election is probably 4 years off, it's what we do from now on, from 2020, that can make the difference at the next election and beyond. Josh, Peter and I have teamed up to bring our collective experience working for campaigns and institutions, including Make Poverty History, the Government Digital Service, 38 Degrees, Channel 4, and more, to our real passion, which is the better democracy under this Forward Democracy banner. We're working on and thinking about what we can do as Forward Democracy about the path to a better democratic situation in the UK and how we can help bring together campaigners, campaigns, active citizens and human beings to take those steps of the path together. It's a truism that, that divided we fall, but it needs more often to be said that together we can win a better democracy. And when we do win a better democracy, the impact of all of our campaigns will be stronger and longer lasting. It's not about politics, but about a better system, one that delivers on the true promise of democracy, where us ordinary people have a meaningful say in how the country is run, and where us ordinary people's needs are met, allowing us to experience and express our full humanity and potential together. We like to say, not left, not right, but forward. The first fruit of this work is the Better Future Forum events, of which today is the first. We're really happy you're here, helping us to build a community of practice. We've got some wonderful speakers who Peter will introduce, and I'm very much looking forward to a spirited discussion later. So without further ado, back to you, Peter.
Thank you, Tom. Right, so it's, yes, with great pleasure that I'm about to introduce you to Peter MacFadyen. Peter will be speaking first, and then we'll be going to Emma, and then to Heydon, and then to Indra. This is a bit of a tradition for me, weirdly enough, because my very first 38 Degrees event in Exeter was actually opened by Peter, and we haven't sort of gone with this running order for posterity, but it just made sense. So Peter is the author of Flatpack Democracy and Flatpack Democracy 2.0. I've got the book here. It's roughly the same sort of color that I am right now, for reasons unbeknownst to me. And yeah, he is the co-initiator of Independence for Frome, and it's going to open up for us to talk a little bit about some of those updates in the second book, and also to talk about Flatpack 2021. So over to you, Peter.
Am I unmuted? Ready to go? Excellent. Good. I'd kind of forgotten about that Exeter event. We started with a really loud bit of music, didn't we? Which was a rehash of David Cameron saying, we're going to take the power from the political elite and give it to the man and woman in the street, to masses of orchestral accompaniment. And some of the elderly people of Exeter who'd come along for something completely different, I think, were slightly blown away by that, but I enjoyed it. Anyway, here we are, no music. So I spotted a tweet yesterday that said, dear media, please stop covering the US as if it were democracy. And I thought, good call, because to me, that sort of sums it up in a sense. Demos, the people, and crassy rule. We haven't got it. And we certainly haven't got it in America. We certainly haven't got it here. In my view, we've never had it here. There are some brilliant innovations, particularly from indigenous people, and some lovely work going on in with the New Zealand government, as you'd expect. You know, it's almost galling what goes on there, isn't it? But you know, looking at how to introduce and reintroduce some of the learning from the past around ways of making decisions. But my feeling is that at just the wrong moment in humankind's brief tenure on the planet, the systems that we use to make our decisions are completely inadequate. And I'm not really very interested in political parties, in the sense that I don't think it's them who are the problem. I mean, there's lots of things that are the problem, but it's the systems that are much more the problem. And it's kind of fine what we have for ensuring what you might call the dem-non-ocracy. In other words, the sort of people don't rule. And that's not surprising, because that's what these things were set out to do. You know, in no uncertain terms, that many of the ways in which we choose the people who are going to make decisions for us were designed to ensure that the rich stay rich and the powerful stay powerful. So what can little old me stuck in my bedroom in Frome do about this? I'm a great believer in localism and local action for three reasons. Firstly, as a sort of non-reason, really, I'm not a multi-billionaire, nor do I possess you know, huge weapons or an army. And so one of the routes that I might have taken to change the systems is kind of not open to me, by taking power in the way that some of those people do or are able to do, because they do have billions of pounds or billions of money and or lots of arms. And secondly, I believe, probably naively, so this is a kind of positive one, that actually if you get a huge number of small changes, they can make up a picture of change. So a bit like pixels, if you're looking at an advertising poster or whatever, it may be kind of close up and you've got all those little dots, it's kind of meaningless. But when you add enough of them together, they can make a real picture of change. And the work that I'm involved in now is based on the knowledge that there's 10,000 parish and town councils in Britain, and huge numbers, I don't know how many actually, of community councils in Wales and Scotland, which are this lowest level of the system that we have of community engagement. Most of those are pretty dysfunctional as well, but for different reasons than the top end. But my belief is that if we could revitalize, you know, blow on the sparks that exist there, then we would really be able to change things in a sort of pixular way all over the country. And that would create a picture of change, and a picture that becomes irresistible. And as I say, perhaps that's a kind of naive belief. And thirdly, I'm doing this and I'm involved in this because I want to stay sane. And I actually believe that it's crucial for my well-being, but also obviously for the people I live with and for the people in my own communities and for people in their communities, that we do the right thing, that we do the right thing even when we're not quite sure it's going to make a difference. And there's lots of Václav Havel quotes that basically say that in much nicer ways. But essentially, it is about kind of doing the right thing because we know it's the thing that we need to be doing. And so I think actually reclaiming the political space and getting involved in our communities in ways that we've seen so excitingly and interestingly over this year can be really crucial. And that if, as part of that, one's able to reclaim a local council, then that can really become a mix that's very powerful. And I also believe that if you trust the people, then they will come up with the goods, that actually people are experts in their own communities, and within every community there is masses of expertise if you're prepared to go out and listen. So I don't believe in representative democracy. I don't think it works anymore, if it ever did. But I do think that if we're able to really get people involved as we need to, and as we've seen this year, then you can, again, change the whole paradigm. So for me, it's about councils at a local level who are bringing everyone in. And finally, I include in that trust a belief that people will do the right thing in relation to their environments. I mean, so all our media, when it's not on the American elections, is so completely, not surprisingly, into telling us what's happening with the pandemic, that it's almost as if we've forgotten a climate and ecological emergency. But I really believe, and my experience is, that if you bring people in and include them in making the decisions about what they want for their own communities, that will include projects and change that covers things like pollution and goes on to things like climate change. So I think if we can re-engender communities at a grassroots level, with councils being a key part of that, and then trust people to really get involved, and then again, get them involved, but also trust them to move us in the right direction, then we can really make a change. And I wrote, as Pete mentioned, a book called Flatpack Democracy, which is about how to take power, and then another one which is the learning of our community in Frome and others as to what happened next. And then I'm now involved with others in running Flatpack Democracy 2021, which I'd really hope you'll sign up to or point people towards, because we're here and ready and waiting to support individuals. There's a lot more council elections in 2021 than usual because the 2021s were cancelled. And so there's a huge opportunity for people to get the council involved in a way that can really engender and revitalize their local communities. And in so doing, I think, kind of help evolve democracy in this country in a way that it's never been evolved before, and perhaps even we'll get to a democracy at some point.
Peter, that's
my opening gambit.
That is time. Perfectly done. Next up, we have Emma Knaggs, who is a director at Make Votes Matter. She is also the grassroots leader. So handing over to you, Emma.
Thanks, Peter. Thank you very much. So as Peter mentioned, I'm part of the team at Make Votes Matter. So we are the campaign for proportional representation in the House of Commons. And we completely agree that the UK does not have democracy right now, particularly because of the archaic first past the post system that is being used to elect our MPs into Parliament. So we've existed since 2015, which was the most disproportional general election that we have had so far, just as a reaction to David Cameron's government getting in. And from there, it was a few volunteers that sort of threw it all together. And from there, we've grown into a campaign. We have over 65,000 people on our database now. So it's grown exponentially. But we need to make this a movement that cannot be ignored. So the growth just needs to carry on and on and on, because we need the whole population to fully understand the fact that we don't have democracy now. There's a surprising number of people that believe that the voting system isn't an issue, and continue to highlight it and make sure that people are aware that proportional representation is really the way to go with democracy. There are actually very few developed countries that still use it across the world, and most of them are ex-colonial British colonies. So apparently it's our greatest British export. In any case, so the campaign at Make Votes Matter has three strands to it. So we have sort of three key aims in our campaign. Number one is building an alliance, or what we call the PR alliance. So that is really bringing together parties, but also civil society groups, prominent people together, all in support of PR. So far we have all of the British opposition parties, apart from Labour, who are signed up to our PR alliance. Labour is the second strand of our campaign. Ultimately, for us to change the voting system, it will need to go through Parliament and become law. And for that to happen, we need one of the two major parties to support it. And as we all know, the Conservatives are not going to support it. They expressly supported first past the post in their latest manifesto, whereas the Labour Party might. There's been significant polling to show that about 3/4 of Labour members support a change to PR, and roughly a third of MPs that we know of are supportive of proportional representation. So our key focus on political parties is on the Labour Party to try and change their policy. So on that, we're working with CLP, so constituency Labour parties at a local level, and asking them to put motions forward to conference so that we'll be able to change party policy from the inside. We're also working on trade unions to do the same, because they obviously have a huge amount of sway within the Labour Party, and trying to get motions through to theirs. Obviously 2020 was supposed to be our year. It was supposed to be a lot of people's years, but coronavirus came along and sort of disrupted some of our plans. So now 2021 is going to be, hopefully, the year that we get support for PR through the Labour Party conference. Thirdly is the grassroots side of things, which is obviously the public support and the growth in local areas. So any change in the law, anything like any of the big campaigns, such as the suffragettes or the Civil Rights Service, or even Peterloo 200 years ago, it also needed mass support from the public in order to change your mind. So we're trying to create this pincer effect where we're influencing people at the top who are able to change the law, but we need this huge grassroots push as well to be able to sort of catch them in the middle and give them nowhere else to go. That you have to make it completely undeniable that the current system is undemocratic and we need to change proportional representation. Incidentally, that's what happened in New Zealand, is that people were just banging on about it so much that ultimately they ended up legislating for PR. It's a bit more complicated than that, but that's basically it. So from a grassroots point of view, like I said, we've got about 65,000 people at the moment on our database. We're always wanting to grow that as much as possible. We do mass action days on a regular basis. So we had one at the end of August. Due to sort of social distancing, it was largely on social media, but we did get a really good rate of exposure through that. We've got one coming up again in December on the anniversary of the general election. So if you sign up to Make Votes Matter, you'll be able to find out when all those details are coming out. We really hope to get it as big as possible to be able to really highlight proportional representation and just keep the pressure up. But yeah, that's basically sort of our campaign and what we're working on.
Thank you very much there, Emma. I should say that, you know, when we were thinking about putting this program together, there is a kind of a loose narrative arc about how these, what the speakers are doing. It sort of links up with Peter kind of, and the people that he's working with innovating at a very local level, and then what makes Votes Matter innovating at a very national level. But that kind of link up between the local with what Emma's doing at the grassroots, as well, kind of does link in with sort of some of the work that Flatpack Democracy and Flatpack 2021 are doing. Emma, you mentioned, you know, what you need is a huge groundswell of public support, and someone who knows quite a bit about reach and getting his message in front of lots of people is our next speaker, Heydon Prowse. Many of you will recognize him from the phenomenally successful TV show, The Revolution Will Be Televised. and Heydon has worked for years with Don't Panic, and was behind some of the very early to viral web-based video campaigns. So handing over to you now, Heydon.
Hey, hi guys. So yeah, so as Peter was saying, I guess my experience is in the sort of realm of creating campaigns, creating adverts, social media, films that go viral to promote particular issues. I have experience, as Peter was saying, in a creative agency called Don't Panic that mostly work with NGOs and charities to promote big campaigns, whether it's Save the Children or Greenpeace, and then also TV, right? So sort of political satire and comedy, talking about issues and causes and being completely impartial at the BBC. I think this conversation came about because Peter and I were quite frustrated and chatting together about how frustrated we were with the left and the sort of centre left constantly at each other's throats, and a sort of people's front of Judea type situation where you can't work out why everyone is so angry at each other all the time when they seem to agree on 99.9% of things. And I think, and the thing I think I wanted to say here was that I actually think that a lot of the stuff that I've been involved in for the last 10 plus years has actually contributed to that balkanization of sort of ideas among the left and the centre left. And, you know, a lot of people are becoming more aware of this now. The Social Dilemma documentary on Netflix, I think, was one of the most viewed documentaries Netflix has ever broadcast, and people are becoming very conscious of the sort of pernicious impact of social media on society. But I think that it has had a hugely negative impact, and it has contributed in many ways to the sort of breakup between the sort of left and the centre left. And I think we need to sort of reimagine the way we do campaigns, because I think for a long time, especially at the birth of social media, it was very easy to confuse a sort of limited popularity with success. And we've seen now how quite divisive sort of demagogues on social media become incredibly popular, but only to a small group of people. They're speaking to people that agree with their specific itinerary of ideas, and anyone that doesn't, anyone that goes beyond that is considered heretical or whatever. And I think we need to move beyond that paradigm and start seeing campaigns from, I guess, a more sort of macro level, and trying to work out what campaigns actually achieve, and trying to separate social media success from actual success in the real world, because they're two very separate things. I've definitely seen the ways in which campaigns that I've done have had negative impacts and hurt people 100% when you think perhaps they're having a positive impact. And I've seen the way, you know, friends and colleagues who definitely had good intentions at the start have actually ended up being sort of ended up creating a lot of the fractures that we see, or helping to create a lot of the fractures that we see. And I don't know how you do this. Obviously, the sort of algorithms that you know, that built into social media are the problem, and are sort of pushing people towards extremist content, pushing people towards crazy content. And I don't know how you create a new paradigm in terms of campaign, because we all need to use social media. I don't know how you can use the algorithms and use social media while not falling foul of that. I don't know, but it's a conversation I'd like to have. I think it revolves around something like this: pride, a feeling of national unity, reclaiming an idea of nationalism, giving it a new branding, a more compassionate branding, some kind of feeling of inclusivity for everyone, and positivity, which is in short supply these days. Is that enough?
Absolutely. No,
Okay.
thank you very much, Heydon, for that. So next, we're going to go to Indra Adnan, who is the co-initiator of the Alternative UK, who is doing a lot of this sort of soft power work, trying to weave this work together, or I should say, some of the themes that we've just heard together, and that's why Indra opted to go last here. So Indra, I'm going to hand over to you now. Let's put the spotlight on you. Off you go.
Thank you very much. And yeah, it's a great build-up of different speakers and looking at each bits of the problem from a slightly different perspective. But just to bring it back for a moment to the election in America, and what we're seeing as the very peak, if you like, of the breakdown of what should be called democracy but isn't, where a huge country has showed up, if you like, as two parties furious with each other, unable to see each other's perspective at all, coming now to, we don't know what's happening over the next couple of hours. Literally, we're in a moment now where we don't know what will happen next. It is that frustrated and angry. There could be violence. There's likely to be all sorts of breakdown, and the question that has been arising from all of these different speakers is how true is this as a representation of any country? Does this binary disagreement actually exist? And I'm going to use that moment to take it back to us here in the UK, because when we started the alternative, or let's say that we decided that an alternative is needed on the day that Joe Cox was murdered 1 week before the EU referendum. And it was a very similar moment and a very similar manifestation of the inadequacy of our political system, where the whole of the country had sort of been conceived as, this binary question: are you for leave or are you for remain? And that both sides were totally making the other wrong for all sorts of imagined reasons, as well as some good reasons. And it led to violence. I mean, if we're thinking about what does the future hold and how should the future be different, we started with this question: if politics is broken, which it clearly is, what's the alternative? And we looked at it in three ways. First of all, what we could see was the idea of a human being at the heart of politics was completely wrong, because if all the people cared about was material things, which is the way that our current politics looks at it, then we would be able to solve that problem very easily if we really were Homo economicus, right? But what that campaign and what all of these campaigns show is that we're very complex, emotional, biological, spiritual, psychological entities called human beings that have so much more to us and so many different needs that, how are we going to begin to design a politics or even a society that begins to get those needs met? And then the second thing we were looking at is really, just the fact that only 2% of people are members of political parties. So is this something to do with the kind of narratives that are built around in our news media? If only 2% of people are defining the political discourse, what's happening with the 98%? And one of the main features of that political discourse is people are powerless. So when people read the mainstream news, they're feeling constantly their powerlessness. And when Peter talked about, a completely wrong idea of power right at the heart of our communities, he's right about that. But is that the only story there is? We started to look at the 98%, and we saw so much innovation, so much creativity, so much possibility, so much humanity outside of that discourse, that we felt the most important thing would be to establish a daily alternative, and that's what we do, right? But then the third thing we thought about is it's really the question that Heydon's been posing today, is in this new digital media reality that everybody's in, with this massive amounts of fragmentation and inability to really land any argument, where can people find any purchase at all? Where can people begin to experience their own agency at all? right? And so the third thing we started to do and think about was the need to build what we call citizens action networks. You know, places where citizens in a town or a city can come together, meet with each other regularly, hear each other out, have quality conversations, and really find what Joe Cox would have called that they have more in common, but not simply in theory, but in actual reality. You know, making relationship, building trust, being together, enjoying being together. We need this in our lives. People need somewhere to find their belonging and begin to feel their agency. But so is this just, you know, community organizing by another name? I'd say it's more than that. Because of living in this global space now, we call them cosmo-local communities. So in the places where people are meeting, they should also be reconnecting with or finding connection with all of the ingenuity, the solutions that are already available. That if you're good at looking at the internet and you're good at seeing how the system is changing, Peter again was talking about all these different system changes that are going on. How do you connect ordinary people to those solutions, right? So our entity, if you like, is to build a citizens action network as the unit, the core of people power. And the only place, you know, that I would add to what Emma's talking about, and Emma's absolutely calling for the need for proportional representation so that the diversity of people can be properly represented in politics. We might go just a step further ourselves and say that maybe we need to build a parallel state system that reaches all the way up to the national level to give us something like a people's parliament or something like that, so that we don't find at the crucial moment when we're beginning to feel our agency, beginning to feel our future that we want to build, we're not then required to hand that power over to the local council, right? Because they will then do with it, unless they're a Flatpack council, of course, you know, where there is a Flatpack council and a citizens action network, to me that is the winning solution. People's Parliament, government, can, Flatpack. Oh, Flatpack and cans, there's something there, isn't there? Yeah. So that's kind of our picture that we're sort of seeing evolving. So that's what we do. We run a new media, we look at the system arising, and we build cans.
Brilliant. Thank you, Indra. Thank you also to everyone posting comments and questions in the chat box. I've got a few specific questions for speakers, but I'm going to open all of your microphones up now. Mainstream reach seems to be a common question. So a question from Alex, your clerk here. I hope I got the pronunciation right. People glaze over when you start talking about systemic issues, however vital those in the sort of democracy building politics space, we know those issues are. So how do we democratize language about democracy? Who wants to take that first? Okay, off you, Emma.
Hi. So this is something that we have been concerned about at Make Votes Matter. It's something that we're very aware of in the way that we have been communicating. We've been using sort of quite academic language, and sometimes because it's quite a high level concept, like Alex was saying, sometimes people just glaze over. So it's something that we're looking into, and we're hopefully going to do some focus groups at the beginning of next year to try and look into improving the language, making it simpler, making it more engaging, to burst out of the bubble that we are in at the moment and trying to get it to that big reach. But I agree, I think some of the language that's used, and just the words proportional representation, frankly, they're too long and it's too much of a mouthful. So it is a project that we are working on at the moment, and we hope to be able to find some better ways of communicating by using things like focus groups next year.
Mm. Caroline Hunt said here, the reason the People's Front of Judea was funny is because it's a problem that, in the left that long predates social media. Heydon, I wonder what you think about, how do we make democracy sexy, do you think?
Do we need to make democracy sexy?
I don't know. You tell me.
What was it? I think Russell Brand once said, it was one of the few good things he said, was that what are politicians other than just the admin bods? Isn't, like, Boris is sexy, Trump is sexy. Like, these are all popular, are quite sexy. I think, isn't this the problem? Is that Corbyn was quite a sexy character. I don't know if we do want to make politicians sexy do. Isn't that part of the problem? I'm quite into a sort of very boring lawyery type like Keir Starmer that'll just get stuff done and take care of things. It's not a fun job. They don't have to be rock stars.
No, I mean, Peter, what was it when you first launched Flatpack Democracy and Froome? You know, it really took the town by storm. I mean, how did you have any specific communication tactics that kind of really managed to, I don't know, spark local imaginations, or was it just kind of just happened accidentally?
I would say it's entirely by being incredibly sexy and having beautiful pictures of us. But actually, I'm not being entirely facetious. We were in Froome, and it's not true of many, indeed most parish and town councils, party politics was important. And our opposition, if you clicked on somebody to, you know, or if you managed to find a link to one of the people who was, let's say, standing as a Labour councillor, you would get taken through to a central Labour who would say, you know, Froome has these people standing. And that's it. There was no information. So we did use social media for the first time. This is now, you know, it's ancient history. This is 11 years ago. So yeah, we put up, you know, this is Peter, this is what he thinks, type things on Facebook and built that kind of thing. And of course, social media is fantastically important for, I would say, of course, for local councils, for people standing in local areas, because, you know, there are thousands of people. For instance, you know, the Froome Facebook site has 16,000 people who are linked to it. That's half the population. So that's how you get to people. And we did do that, which was kind of unheard of at this level, and remains unheard of. You know, there are many parish councils that, the parish and town councils, that have completely failed to use Zoom or anything like that, because they're still basically doing things with paper, not necessarily quills, but nearly. Which I should just say, I think it was, I've forgotten, I'll have to go back up the, back up the question. So as Matthew said, that he says many parish councils, including my own, are not dysfunctional, and he resents that broad brush, and he's absolutely right. And I should have said exactly that, you know, there are many great town and parish councils. In my view, the vast majority, you know, do not manage to do very much. And it's a chicken and egg thing. Why would anyone join a parish council that's so boring and so difficult to engage with? But there are some really great ones doing great work, and I should have said that.
Thank you for mentioning that, Peter. I was actually going to put that directly to you. So yeah, well weaved in there. Indra, we've talked quite a lot about, you know, how we engage the cultural sort of sectors to help to kind of amplify work around a democratic innovation. And it makes me think about the alternative Denmark's video where they were like, right, well, if we were going to make a political advert that didn't look like a political advert, what would it look like? And it is, I mean, it's extraordinary, it's completely bizarre, but it really worked, didn't it? Like, how could we, would we want to look to replicate something like that here? Do you think that would work?
Yeah, I mean, my sense, I think in a funny sort of way, your question is legitimate, you know, what's sexy? Because where Uffe Elbæk was always coming from is, you know, where's the energy? And I think that is the question, where's the energy? That, you know, when you feel your pulse quicken around something, you know, that's what is attractive, right? And quite often that moment comes when you make a relationship with someone. You know, you suddenly connect with someone and that energy arises, and then suddenly that's where you want to be, in that relationship. And I think there's a lot of that in the current politics, or in the promise of a new politics, is all the relationship making that can go on either at community level, but can also go on, you know, in the virtual space as well. You know, thinking about how how do we get out of our bubbles, particularly with the progressive left or the center left, or what we want to call this space. It's not about trying to get people to like us more in that sense. It's really about getting to know others, outside of our circle, and making those relationships and suddenly finding what they're doing sexy, So there used to be this conversation all the time of how do we make our space more diverse? And it was all about how to invite people into our space. But actually, it became more diverse when we started to make relationships with people outside of our bubble and suddenly see what they were into. And then suddenly we were about what they were into, and that was making it more popular and more, actually more sexy, to be honest. So I would say put number one, relationship making at the heart of all of this, and perhaps not try to make people more like ourselves.
Mm. Yeah. So when we asked our illustrious panel to join us, part of the sort of invitation was to think about an ask that they might make of this community, and that's a mechanism that we're going to run throughout this series. So the first one is it was two questions. Firstly, if you could have anything right now to support you in your work, what do you need? And then the second question is, do you have a particular call to action of the community, that something that you'd like them to go and do, sign something, join something, be part of something? So with the first question, what do you need right now? Maybe I'll go to Emma first.
Thanks. Well, sadly, it all sort of boils down to money, unfortunately. So really, I think we've been trying to apply for various grants, but many of the organisations that give them out tend to only take references from contacts that they already know, and we don't quite have the right friends in the right places. So if anyone does have the right friends in the right places, then we would very much love to hear from them.
And what might your call to action be, Emma?
Last night we launched a petition to Keir Starmer, which is an open letter to him, basically based on the US election, saying please don't let us end up like America. So you would please sign our petition to Keir Starmer, calling on him to support proportional representation, please.
Fantastic.
Thanks, Robin. It's just shared it in the chat.
Thank you, Robin. And what we're going to do is we will summarize these and include them in our wrap-up email that we'll send out tomorrow. Heydon, is there anything that you need or a request that you would make of the community?
I don't have any serious campaigns. I did have a silly one, which was a call to join the movement for tolerant and extremely rational jihad. So it was just about getting everyone to be very extreme about being very calm and tolerant and moderate. Not moderate in the sort of boring centrist sense, but just in the sort of compassionate sense. But I do think we need to I do think there is some, perhaps there's some sexiness there, right? You could be extremely radical and a real extremist about being very rational and very tolerant.
Okay, great. Thank you. Indra.
Yeah, we are currently fast prototyping our citizens' action networks, because particularly looking at what's going on in America and look what's going on here, is that we feel we need containers for people's power. And so we're actively looking for small to medium community groups that want to work prototyping citizen action networks with us. And we're bringing in a lot of different forms of expertise, but we want them to be all over the country, not simply, at the moment we're working in Plymouth and Stoke and Birmingham, but we'd like them to be all over the country. So if you're ready to do some prototyping of cosmo-local citizen action networks with us, we'd like to hear from you.
Brilliant. And was there a need in there? Something that you need right now?
There's a need for as much of that expertise as we can get, but also I'm slightly moving into the other question, but the sense that people could sign up to the Daily Alternative is kind of vital as far as we're concerned, because until people start having the story that we have the power and that there are alternatives and that the solutions are already there. It's like really establishing a new narrative about this moment for us is the most vital thing. So every week we have 7 new things that are happening already that we need more people to buy into and get with this story that something else is possible. So sign up to the Daily Alternative.
Yeah, I must say I highly recommend that move. It's a fantastic newsletter. So yeah, excellent. And also has a great digest of events coming up that kind of all fall within our circles of interest. Peter, I'll put that question to you. What do you need and what would you ask of the community?
So I'd written down something, but which I'll come to in a second. But I'm really interested in some of the comments in the chat that we've had, or some of them. So Matthew, as I said before, I apologise for labelling all councils or seeming to label all councils as deeply, incapable of doing anything, which wasn't what I meant to do. And then, but then I've just had a quick look at Matthew's council and also at Congleton Town Council, which Caroline says is excellent. I'm sure they are in many ways, but I guess what I'd ask of the community is to look to the possibility that they could do even more. I think we've come to accept what these councils do, and what I see on websites won't necessarily give me all the answer, but what I see is something which is solid and capable and doing things which I frankly don't think are going to be enough to take us to really face up to the challenges that we're heading into. And that wouldn't have mattered before, but it does now, because the district, the council, the counties, the unitaries, central government are not going to provide the support that they ever did. And we've seen that with austerity. We're going to see it again as we disappear into a recession. We're heading into a complete chaos, surely, of Brexit. So I just ask people to be open-minded. Have a look at Froom's website and see what they've achieved. Buy my books if you want, and see what the second one is all about, what can be done by councils if they really up their game. And my ask would be that if you know of people who are in councils or places where there aren't councils that are really functioning, to sign up to Flatpack 2021 and just get involved in that and see if, maybe everything's fine. And I definitely don't want to, this isn't about world domination, as I said before. It's kind of like trying to up the game for where it's needed. And so I'd like people to be open-minded, and then please link anyone and any places and groups of individuals who want to work together with the campaign. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thanks, Peter. We've got a question from Anne Thor-Dupont, who's studying an MA in TV journalism. She's asking, what do you think is the broadcast media's role in this? Who'd like to take that?
I think broadcast media's got a lot to answer for, doesn't it? I don't think people trust mainstream media anymore, right? It's hard to, I don't necessarily think it's all mainstream media's fault. I think a lot of this in the UK goes back to from sort of 2003-4 onwards. We had the Iraq war, we had the expenses scandal, we had the banking crash. I think people suffer from political or establishment fatigue, and just trust in establishment figures completely drained over the last 10-15 years. And I think that goes a long way to explaining the rise of people like, Nigel Farage, these sort of periphery figures that previously were just seen as loons, and people's increasing obsession with conspiracy theory. I think that mainstream media doesn't do itself. I mean, I get as frustrated as anyone with, the people, I don't know what other terms to use other than the left and the right, so I'm going to keep doing it. People on the left criticising the BBC, and the people on the right doing exactly the same thing. I mean, presumably, if you've got people from the two political extremes saying that the BBC is biased, then they must be doing something right. So I'm a massive supporter and fan of the BBC in most instances. I think the problem's worse in the States, right? I think it was, most people that I know that move in my circles. I mean, the reason I'm so critical of the left is because everybody I know is left. So I think that's a really important thing to do, is to be critical of your own social group these days. And I think in America, in relation to broadcast media, it's a really bad state of affairs where you have incredible journalists like Glenn Greenwald quitting The Intercept, which is a news organization that he set up because of its failure to cover the Hunter Biden story, because mainstream media has become so partisan in the States. It's that bad. And then you have Twitter squashing a perfectly valid journalistic story because it doesn't corroborate with their noble agenda of getting Trump out. But I think in the long term, it undermines media more generally. That's dangerous.
It's a good point about both sides thinking that the BBC is biased against them, so they're probably doing something right there. But it looks like the BBC. Well, I mean, we know that the BBC is in trouble because the current administration, essentially doesn't agree with it, or at least the way that it's funded. Looking across the pond, we can see the merits of a publicly funded sort of media platform and news platform. But I wonder, I mean, the way news is done in general, I mean, it's really sort of seated in negativity. It's sort of what's urgent and immediate and mostly bad. I mean, does this come down to privatization versus public, or is this just the way that the news editorial lens is sort of created all over the world?
It's such a big question you're asking, Pete, and we should probably have a whole hour on this.
We will. We're going to have a better journalism at some point.
Okay, but one of my responses to that would be that I think it was you, Heydon, who mentioned the social dilemma and how we're suddenly aware of how our minds are being targeted and we're being manipulated and hijacked, if you like, by other people's agendas. But I really would, say that that's been happening probably, all of our lives, and if you look at the way that the BBC set out for us and has always set out for us what are the norms of our society, that nevertheless have led us to the state that we're in now, we should always be questioning the role of the media and what our personal relationship to these bigger stories is, and that's one of the reasons I want to put the single human being at the heart of this problem back, because if we can't reclaim our own minds from this whole mediascape, and we're only ever looking for the right media, I don't think we're going to win this battle, because we need to move so far from where we are now to something quite new and authentic and original and human driven. We can't expect even the beautiful BBC to hold that space for us. And just to give you a very small example, when conflict breaks out, we're always very quickly moving into the question of, are we going to war or not? That's typical in a way of the sort of, the narratives that still govern us, that where there is conflict, there's going to be violence. And, we need to move away from these things. There's so much better ideas of what could happen, or why conflict is useful and and interesting, not why should it lead to violence, which is the immediate thing that happens with the news media. Even the best news media goes there. So how do we reclaim our minds from the mediascape before we start to enjoy all these different things that are available to us?
Just what you were saying there made me think about Chris Morris's The Day to Day, that brilliant sketch. It's war, from the diplomatic relations between Australia and yeah, it's brilliant. Okay, so I've just got half an eye on the time. We're 3 minutes to 6. We are running a few minutes over, but. Yeah, what I did, and thanks for that question, Anne. What I did want to do, and we probably don't have time for this right now, but I'm going to ask it anyway, because there was a lot of excited chat when we discussed this yesterday. I just wanted to bring up citizens' assemblies, because there's a lot of excitement at the moment that they could become, or they could be some sort of democratic panacea. However, we were sort of saying, or I was saying, without some kind of binding outcome, like what's the point? So by investing time and resources into assemblies, are we sort of extending the band-aid versus curing the problem, i.e. governments, local and national, just don't listen to people? Ooh. Emma, because you just, I mean, what you...
Well, I don't disagree. I get your point. And I'm afraid I have another meeting at 6, so I really can't stay very long. But from a Make Votes Matter point of view, we do recommend that a new proportional voting system is chosen by a citizens' assembly. And the timeline for it in our mind, the sort of route to get PR is, number one, we have to get the Labour Party on board. Number two, a citizens' assembly would be done before the general election. So it would probably take, I'd say, probably a couple of years to sort of create it, build it up, get the right sort of mix of people, and get to a point where there are recommendations that come out of it of the type of system that should be used in the UK. And then all opposition parties that support change to PR would then commit to having those recommendations in their manifestos. And then, in theory, they would be elected based on their manifesto promises, and the coalition of those opposition parties would then be able to, would have enough of a public mandate to legislate directly to change the voting systems based on the recommendations that came out of that citizens' assembly.
Brilliant.
So that is our map to PR. But your question is still very valid.
Thanks, Emma. What's your take on it, Peter? Just quickly to there. My apologies for throwing it in there at the end.
No. I mean, so I basically agree that if the decision-making body is not going to be mandated, it's not going to say we will take this forward. There's a real problem. But it's one of the really interesting things that you can do at the lower levels again, or at the community level. So we in Froome had we used participatory budgeting quite a lot, where the people choose, to distribute funds from the budget. And we included anyone above the age of 10 could vote, because we suddenly realized we could do that. Because actually what they were doing was they were recommending to the council, and we, the council, promised to take their decisions. Now, we made the final decision on the distribution of the public's money, and we could have reneged on that promise. But at this level, where within a community where you kind of know that's not going to happen and so on, you can do these things. At higher levels, I think it's a real problem. The British citizens' assemblies on climate were, for me, hamstrung from the start, because the government said, we'll have a look at your reports, and then we'll think about it. Waste of time. The French, on the other hand, had a situation more like Froome, where Macron kind of got himself into a corner where he said, we'll have this massive citizens' assemblies, or mass of them, and I will accept them. So he'd said that right up front, and they did, of the 246, I think, might have got that number wrong, recommendations, all but 2 were accepted, and they were only on technical reasons. So they may be more use than you're suggesting, I think, but there is a fundamental problem unless there's buy-in to accept the decisions. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So on that very sort of spicy, controversial note, I'm going to conclude now. Thank you all to all of our speakers, Emma, Heydon, Peter, and Indra. Thank you very much. Do hang around if you can. We're going to just have a social hangout for the next half an hour or so. Thank you to all of you for joining us. We will be announcing our next event, Better Education, which is taking place on the 3rd of December at 5 o'clock again. So we're going to be hosting these on the first Thursday of every month. Thank you all for joining us. It's really strange doing these virtual things because we kind of want to have a bit of a cheer, but we can't. So just silent cheer. There we go. Right, so we're going to move into that now. Also, please keep an eye out for our email tomorrow that will summarize our kind of calls to action and ways that you can get involved with what we're doing with Forward Democracy. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much.